hatching up new collectibles from cocoons. Here's a look at the Hiya Toys Godzilla, King of the Monsters, Mothra. Its original and rightful rulers, the Titans, they are part of Earth's natural defense system, a way to protect the planet and maintain its balance. Now Mothra, the queen of the monsters from Godzilla King of Monsters, joins Hiya's exquisite basic. The Mothra figure is 14.2 inches wingspan with 11 points of articulation. Mothra features accurate details, faithfully capturing its on-screen appearance, includes a display base to recreate air poses. First thing we'll do, before we get a closer look at the exquisite basic Mothra from Godzilla King of the Monsters, of course, I'd like to thank the folks first over at Hiya Toys that did provide this sample that we're about to have a look at here. I'm going to grab the tape measure, and like I had done before with Rodan, I'm actually going to keep Mothra on the display base simply just because it's a lot easier to have a look at this. We're going to take it obviously off the display base, but for right now at least, from one end of its wing to the other, Mothra impressively has a wingspan of 14 inches in width. Flip that around, you're looking then at Mothra being about, I would say, 35.5 centimeters wide. And while this may not prove to be the easiest thing to do, let's just carefully slide over Mothra and then carefully bring in Rodan that we already had a look at here. One thing I did do differently when it came to Mothra is I did reduce the length of her adjustable neck. She does have an adjustable neck just as long and just as posable as what we got here from Rodan. I just reduced the width of it because I don't actually feel like it needs to be a lot longer than what I've got it going right now. Other comparisons, of course, we can make as I just make a lot of noise in the background. Here's what she also looks like with Godzilla. Granted, again, this is Godzilla from Godzilla vs. Kong, not necessarily Godzilla King of the Monsters, but it still fits the same bill. Here's also what it looks like, casting shadows over him. Here's what Mothra also looks like with Godzilla, or King Kong, I should say. The combatant who fights Godzilla, of course, in Godzilla vs. Kong. Yeah, but like I was saying, though, I did reduce the length of the adjustable neck because I don't think it actually needs as long of a neck as what we got with Rodan. And by actually being able to remove the component pieces for the adjustable neck, you can actually then have the monsters of various heights. We're going to go ahead and remove Mothra right now. Just take her from the display stand. One thing that is different, as I go ahead first and just remove this, just to show you that there is an additional piece. There's an additional part that I just happen to have removed. I'm going to just take that, then add the extra part that I left behind. And there we go. We have, again, like the same length of neck. It's just simply a case, I reduced it. I like the idea that you can detach these. So if you do find that the neck is way too long, simply just move the parts that you don't need and keep the parts behind that you do. This does have, again, a removable peg. Although, again, the peg, a little harder to do. It was a lot easier, at least, to remove it than it did with Rodan. I still had to heat the peg for Rodan in order to remove it from the tray. Now, the base, as you can see, again, has 9 available holes. I just happen to choose the one that's in the middle. You can, though, plug this in anywhere that you want, really, on the display stand. But I always like to put it right in the middle. One thing you also can do, as we had looked before with Rodan, you get these little eye brackets. I'm a little worried the fact that they are actually using clear plastic for the eye brackets, and while maybe I'm less worried the fact they use the clear plastic for the base, I think just by using pegs, something that's going to connect with one another, because of course you can interlock these bases together. I just don't know, clear plastic, while it does keep the consistent look of clear, I just worry that the plastic being used may actually start to fracture and even potentially break. So just be careful, of course, when you're removing bases. That's across the board. It doesn't even matter whether it's Rodan, Mothra, or any display base. Just be careful. That's all I ask. One thing also with the adjustable neck, with all the component pieces together, you have 4 knuckle joints that you can then vary in degrees. Now, again, you could easily have just used the same length at the beginning and just adjusted the neck, but then I just felt there was all this extra stuff flopping around. So instead, I just decided to reduce the length of it. On the very end of it, though, one thing you'll get differently done here from Mothra is the waist clip that's going to fit around her waist. Rodan's was about, I would say, double the width of this. And though, while you may think to yourself, that's a smaller waist clip, that's going to make things a lot easier when it attaches around Mothra's body. Unfortunately, no, it's not the case. If you look at Mothra's body, I mean, the detail that they put to the piece alone actually makes me feel like I'm actually holding a real insect. But you can see, like, right here, in between the smaller wingspan, you can see, like, there's just enough space here to get the waist clip in there. And there's a very narrow waist that you can then take the clip and fit that around. But you have to fight this around the wings, the smaller wings that make up the figure's body. And again, when you get it on there, because the wingspan is so great on this, you find you'll get a lot of times where the figure wants to lean forward, just because there's so much mass of plastic making up the wings, of course. Again, when you are putting this around the waist, let me see if I can get it actually close in there so you can see what's going on here. Get it sort of around the tiny little wings, and then kind of do your best to clamp it around the body. And right there, it's almost as if I caught myself a real insect. It does hold the body, but again, like putting it down, for example, you may have to then readjust it when you're putting it on display. And again, I do really think like the neck is way too long to accommodate Mothra. I would, again, just shorten that. Not that I have to be telling you guys exactly what to do, but you can do whatever, of course, you want. Getting a closer look at Mothra with display stand aside. Just going to move the arms out of the way. Neat thing about this is it's really posable. But first, before we talk about the posability of Mothra, I certainly did want to show you guys the face, as small as it may be. Hiya Toys did just as much work to Mothra as they did with the earlier looked at Godzilla, the earlier looked at Kong, and the most recently looked at Rodan. The head sculpt is fantastic on this. You can see, though missing maybe tiny little whiskers and the fibers you'd expect to see on a real moth, everything else really nicely captured here in plastic. You can see the tiny little eyes, for example, outlined very nicely in additional beige. The beige, in fact, while looking at it, it kind of really does have a replicated look of what you'd expect to see with a moth, just again a little bit larger. But I was really, again, surprised to see that there's so much posability in this. And while there maybe isn't as much posability, there really isn't any posability in the head, she still manages to get posability in the shoulders. The shoulders themselves are individually socketed. So you of course, can move those back and forth. And again, there's like an abdomen, waist, and all that fun stuff. But we're going to talk more about the posability in a moment. Obviously, the real sell of Mothra, just to hopefully show you guys everything that's going on here, is the wingspan and all the work that they put into the wings themselves. The wings capture, again, the little eyeballs there on the ends of the wings. And again, like the feathering that they've done to the texturing of the wings is just incredible work from Hiya's part. Might be one of the best Mothra figures I think we've ever gotten. Again, not only is the sculpting really good on this figure, but again, all the paint work that they put to this piece. It transitions considering like the fact that there's so many different colors being used here, primary colors of blue, yellow, and red. Again, varying colors to that. But the fact that they transition it nicely, that the blue does blend nicely then into the yellow, does blend then nicely into the red. And again, you got some really nice additional details added there. But just to look at the texturing to the wingspan alone. And just as much work gets spent to the top as it does to the bottom as well. Flip this around so you can see as well that the wings don't look that different than they do on the top. Again, you got some nice additional white lining that they've added in there as well. But I'm really, really impressed with the work that they put into this. The smaller wings, though a little smaller and obviously in size, still captures, again, that nice color of the warm orange, warmish reddish orange, I suppose, the blues, and of course the yellows. And again, they've added a dry brushing of white on there also as well to really, again, drive home the fact that this is an insect's wings. What I was really impressed to see as well is the fact that even the smallest wings does have posability. And again, I guess we could probably talk about that right now. So for the posability on Mothra, be very careful right here. She does have hinge joints, so you can bring the wings out. So if you prefer to have the wings a little higher up on Mothra, that's something that you can easily do. Although one thing you will want to be careful about is while the wings are on hinges, you can move them up and down this way. You can also rotate them, but just for the size of the hinges, of course, just be a little bit careful while you're doing that. The smaller wings work the same way, so they also hinge up and down this way. You can also turn them, but when you turn them, you want to make sure that this one hinge right here brushes very closely, too close for quarters if you ask me, to the shoulders. So just make sure that when you're rubbing this back and forth, you're not rubbing the plastic there on the shoulders. But again, those hinge up and down really nicely as well. Then for Mothra's body, as we talked a little already about it, the shoulders themselves are individually socketed. So you can move them back and forth this way. You can hinge them out this way. But then these smaller individual legs inside, the ones that are smaller of the two, those also hinge up and down as well. And you can hinge them back and forth this way too. As for the abdomen, so I guess goes from the thorax to the abdomen, in between the two, there seems to be a very generous ball joint. Much more generous than what I was really expecting. This does hinge up and down this way, does rotate this way. And then for the back hind legs, would they still be hind legs? I guess they would be. There's also socket joints there as well. And those ball joints really help to work these legs where you can move them back and forth this way. And you can also hinge them in and out as well. All in all, just really impressed with how this one turned out. while it's a little bit smaller in features than, of course, what we got with Rodan. See if I can actually get Mothra this time around on her display stand. I know I did struggle a bit when it came to Rodan's review, trying to get him actually onto the display base. Again, with Mothra, the thing about Mothra is that her waist is so very narrow, and then you have to kind of get the clip in between the side sections of her wings. And between all of that, it might be making a little more of a harder time to do that. So we're going to go just do our best to kind of clip this around her waist. It always seems to be near the end of these reviews too. You know what I'll do also? Seeing as I did start things off by removing parts to this display stand neck, I'm going to do the exact same thing while I'm wrapping up here too. Just because it's a lot easier. It's a lot less neck to hold on to. Then we're going to go ahead and clip this again around Mothra's tiny little waist. The waist is so small on this. Now let's see if we can actually get Mothra on her display stand. If not, certainly we will cut away, and then finally when we get back to final looks, I'll have this all squared away. It's again so much easier when you're not doing this, when you're not filming this, but obviously we're going to get her on her display stand. Again, just hold on 1 second. Let me go ahead and clip this around her waist. Like, just to show you what I'm dealing with right here. Here's the size of her waist clip. Here's where I have to get that around her. And again, just to clip that. Also doing this while the camera is filming can make for a little more of a difficult time. Anyways, though, we're going to get things all squared away when it comes to certainly final looks. One thing it did take me a little bit of time to do, and eventually I did get Rodan back onto his display stand. Yeah, you know, great looking figures all in all, but the hardest thing about them is just the fact that the waist clips, obviously they made them smaller to accommodate Mothra than what they would have used for, say, Rodan. But still, like the waist clips only being on hinge joints, like there's little hinges that allow, of course, the waist clips to move back and forth, but it really isn't still, I feel, enough to really capture and hold on to it. I don't really know what else I would have done differently, because obviously if they just used a C-clamp and nothing else with no additional articulation, I think it still would have been a harder time and may have even run the risk of even snapping that waist clip when getting in onto the figures. There's Rodan. And there's Rodan, there's Mothra, and I've actually got just Mothra for right now resting against Rodan. Nice looking pieces, though. Really nice work from Hiya's part. The neat thing I really like also about these figures is not only do they show well, but they're also fully articulated. Something I really wasn't expecting. I was expecting, obviously, with Rodan, with the amount of posability that they managed to put into his piece, but maybe I wasn't expecting as much to be put into Mothra. And again, I was really surprised to see that they made individual hinge joints for all of the individual legs. They made hinge joints for not only the larger wingspan wings, but also the smaller wings. She's a lot more posable than really probably what you would expect. As glorious as Mothra and Rodan turned out, I feel the only detriment to both the figures is the way they attach onto the display stand. You're only really relying on two pegged hinges on either side of a waist clip that for all intensive purposes are supposed to clip around the figure's body. It doesn't work the greatest, and I almost would have said, although it would have made for an unruly hole on the bottom of Mothra, I wonder if they could have just put a hole on the bottom of her body and not simply just pegged the display stand into it. I mean, obviously it would have done away with the waist clip altogether. It would have had one little bit of less plastic, and it would have, I think, shown Mothra a little bit better without having to rely on the waist clip. Whether, in fact, that would have held it better, it would be impossible to be able to say that, not having the chance to try that myself. And I'm obviously not going to be putting a hole on the bottom of Mothra, but it is really the only thing I feel that is a detriment to both the figures. The figures look fantastic, they're well painted, and they're surprisingly more articulated than I really was expecting. Rodan, I sort of expected what I was going to be getting with the posability, but I wasn't as expecting as much of the posability with Mothra. I was really impressed with what we ended up getting. But again, like the only thing I would have said to the figure is I really wish they could change the display stance. It may work well, I think, for figures that are standing, but when you have figures that are flying, you really do need to require relying on that waist clip to fit properly around the figure's body. And if it doesn't fit well enough, then unfortunately what you're going to end up having, like I end up having with both the reviews of Rodan and Mothra that I did have a look at, you're not going to have a figure that's going to stay stably well in place to that waist clip. Other than that, though, a great looking figure, though. What I still will say is probably one of the best Mothra figures we've gotten from a sculpt standpoint, and the amount of paint that they put into the wings of Mothra, all four of them, the bigger and the smaller. Yeah, all in all, nice looking figure. Don't like the display stand, but I like the figure that's at least attached to the display stand. Once again, a big thank you to the folks over at Hiya Toys. They did provide this sample of the Godzilla King of the Monsters, Monsterverse Mothra. We got to look at this review. What do you guys think of the figure? Let me know down below in the comments section. Is this a figure you could see yourselves picking up? Also, as well, if you guys enjoyed this video, want to hit a like. If you guys are loving the content you guys are seeing and on board to see more, then make sure you hit the subscribe button down below, and as well that you're turning on the bell notification. There's going to be a lot more videos coming your way, guys. So as always, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.